Hi, and welcome to TransAction TV. I'm your host, Anthony Attanasio, CEO of Hawk Strategies. Joining me for today's episode is Ariella Maron, you're the Executive Director, correct?
Executive
of the
Director.
Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, which we are going to call the DVRPC for the rest of this interview. Ariella, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So not everyone is familiar, with metropolitan and regional planning organizations as well as they should be, let's say, so especially how it affects them. So could you tell us a little bit about the DVRPC and a little bit about it and then the value it brings to your region?
That's great. So the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission is the bi-state, 9-county metropolitan planning organization for the greater Philadelphia region. So we're covering Philadelphia and the collar counties, and in New Jersey we have Mercer, Burlington, Camden, and Gloucester counties as well. And there's some work that we're required to do as an MPO. We create long-range planning documents to align the region's vision and goals and priorities, specifically how we prioritize large transportation projects for the region. We're required to do our transportation improvement programs, which is just the budgeting of the implementation of that long-range plan, which helps make sure our bridge projects move forward and highways and multimodal projects, transit, etc. But we do a lot more than that. We see the network goes beyond the transportation network, right? Because it is impacted by and impacts housing, economic development, natural resources, energy infrastructure, and just basically the communities that depend on it.
Right.
And as someone who started my career and spent over 20 years really focused on local government and big cities, I was always amazed at even the most resource cities, how hard it was for them to get things done that really impacted the quality of life of communities, whether it's related to transportation, housing, energy, etc. And really been amazed by the ability to scale up innovation and ensure more efficient planning and implementation that you can do at the regional scale. Seeing it as the most efficient way to take local priorities, connect them to state, federal resources, and streamline the implementation. So I made the shift a few years ago for that exact reason.
That's great. They say, what's the value of an MPO? And you just hit it on the head, which is matching need and planning with resources, right?
Yes.
So that's great. Now, one of the things you mentioned was, how MPOs are required to have a long-range plan. And that plan, based on the timeline, is due this year. So the last one was done in 2021, which was COVID.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about where you are with your long-range plan today. Maybe a little bit about what's different between how you had to do it in 21 versus right now.
Right. Because a long-range plan is due every 4 years, we are actually always in the process of working on it. So the one that was from 2021, which is when the board adopted it, work started on that in 2017. And you can imagine between 2017 and now, the world has changed a lot. I mean, the world has changed a lot in just the last 2 to 3 months.
Sure.
Which makes long-range planning challenging. But it does make sure that we're centering the right work, the work for the communities and priorities. So for the most part, we set out to just do a minor update. Does the vision still sound right? Do our priorities and strategies sound right? Are there any new major regional projects that we want to make sure we have on the docket for future implementation? But what we really wanted to do is to make it more accessible. We don't want it to be a plan that sits on the shelf. We know that the funding for the transportation, large capital projects move forward, but we want to make sure it's something that doesn't sit on a shelf and it's just an example of look at all the strategies we could name, but really makes it accessible for the different partners and different audiences to understand it and make it really clear how it gets implemented. And part of that, we realized, is focusing on where our planning partners and communities actually have the most powers and authorities. And you and I know the key to transportation planning is not necessarily about transportation engineers. It's actually about land use planning, where the people are choosing to live, where people are developing, and the transportation network is connecting. So we have worked on updating our land use models. We are introducing this density intensity zone and updating our planning centers to make it clear that it's not one-size-fits-all strategies to improve communities and mobility that will work in the core of Philadelphia all the way to the more rural areas out in Burlington, Gloucester County, and Chester County, but that there is a range. But in each of these places, our job in our long-range plan is make sure we're not just tracking growth, but guiding that growth to happen in smarter places, transit-oriented, transportation-oriented development.
That's impressive. And I mean, I want to get to ask you a question about your priorities for the greater Philadelphia region, but you brought up an interesting point, which is that, people are changing where they live or how they live. We obviously changed how we work, many of us, after, COVID and virtual, but we don't have the benefit of several of the Midwestern or Southern states that have a lot of open land and a lot of place to just build new roads. You see in some of the Southern states, they build brand new highways to facilitate new development, whether it be corporate or residential. We are the oldest and most overbuilt region in the country. So not a lot of room in the bag to fit more. So cheers to you for recognizing that difference and how to move people and goods.
And we wouldn't want to, because all those folks who are building new highways, what they're going to realize in 50, 60 years, it costs money to maintain those.
Operations
so the
and
more you
maintenance.
build, the more you have to maintain. And we get to the point that the funding that we do have available, that we show in our long-range plan and in our transportation improvement projects, the money that we have to prioritize projects because it's a limited pot, the vast majority of it has to go to maintenance and reconstruction, whether it's for our bridges and there's not enough money for them and they're not in all great condition, although we're doing a better job, our roads. So we need to be doing something smarter. We can't just make costs more and more expensive for the next generation.
Well, I have a lot of elected official friends, and I say this with a grain of salt. They love ribbon cuttings.
They love them.
Love them.
You know what? Our region loves ribbon cuttings for trails.
Yeah.
We have so many trail ribbon cuttings, and they make everyone so happy. So there's something for everyone.
That's good. When you like to build new big pieces of infrastructure, and then you go, okay, now it's this agency's responsibility to take care of, or the local government. Well, someone's got to pay for it, to your point.
Yeah.
So talking about priorities, can you give us what the top priority for the greater Philadelphia region is right now?
There is complete consensus across all of our planning partners that safety has become and currently is the number one priority. And so our region has committed to a regional Vision Zero goal, which means no new traffic deaths on any of our roadways, because any death is unacceptable. And it's putting in place this safe systems, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, system, which is saying, just making it about people's behaviors isn't enough, because mistakes happen, but we need to think of behaviors, we need to think of speed limits and enforcement, we need to think of roadway designs, and we need to think of post-crash care. And having that as a priority when we're doing our funding prioritization, like which projects get funded, we put the most amount of weight, this is what the region has agreed to do, on safety, to make sure we're investing in those projects that will make it safer for people to get where they need to go.
That's fantastic. I know Governor Murphy signed a law for the Target Zero Commission. Did that happen in Pennsylvania?
There's different efforts. Both states are so different in how they approach these things.
They are.
But we do have a seat on that commission, and we're very happy to see that move forward. And as a region, we've been leading this regional Vision Zero effort. We had one Safe Streets for All funding for ourselves for planning and supporting our county and municipalities in getting it. And this goes back to that more efficient way of doing planning. Instead of everyone figuring out everything on their own, we're doing the regional high injury network. We're doing the maps. We're doing the data collections. We're creating the framework, and we're making it easier for the counties and municipalities then to apply this for their areas, as opposed to everyone having to do it on their own. And it's been a fantastic collaborative effort, and I would say a successful one.
That's fantastic.
I mean, hopefully the numbers show it's successful.
Knock on wood, but
successful as planning. We have a long way to go.
Because you can't engineer out all of the issues. The pedestrian behavior is part of it, but it sounds like you're doing your best to cover the rest. So
and everyone's bringing different best practices to the table. Something we learned from Delaware County, for example, is they have this safety ambassador program where they have representatives from all of their communities who are on the ground helping to move forward the safety work, right?
Fantastic.
Everyone's involved.
Everyone has to be. So let me ask you one last question, of course, because you're a federal organization, and obviously we have a new administration in Washington, which is providing both challenges and opportunities. So tell us something that has you staying up at night, and also tell us something that you're excited about based on what's happening in Washington and the federal government.
You know, regardless of what is happening at the federal level right now, we were already in the midst of a funding crisis, and I don't use the word crisis lightly. Last week, the transit agency in the southeast Pennsylvania side, SEPTA, which does have service that touches on the New Jersey side too, since we're at TransAction, they put out their next budget, their fiscal year 26 budget, and it had a $213 million deficit. And to meet that, it had a number of service cuts, like an immediate 21% cut across all modes, a 21% fare increase, and if the structural deficit isn't addressed, massive service declines. We're talking 5 regional rail lines would be closed, 50 bus routes stopped. So this is the definition of a region, because our community is so dependent on SEPTA. You can't have efficient economic driver for the region without transit.
100%.
And you have the people who are dependent on the transit system to get to work, to school. Those who can afford it have cars, but we're in the middle of doing modeling on our travel demand model. We're still working on it, but estimates of over 1 million extra vehicle miles in volume in Philadelphia alone, and another 1 million in the suburbs, and we're still assessing exactly what that means. That impacts our entire economy. It impacts supply chains.
Right.
It impacts our competitiveness as a region.
Sure.
And on top of that, we still have all of our capital projects, both on transit and on the roadways. Our long-range plan, we see there's a 5-to-2 ratio. For every $5 of capital funding need we have for our region, again, those bridges and roads and transit, there's $2 projected to be available.
Right.
And so we need to find additional ways to fund our infrastructure. Federal government, yes. State government, yes. But there has to be more, and we're pursuing and looking at more, but it's a very critical issue that we're not the only ones feeling, but because we're older and because we're so built out and because our transit agencies are the least funded, we're feeling it first and harder.
Yeah, SEPTA and New Jersey Transit are chronically underfunded from an operational subsidy standpoint.
Yeah.
I mean, New Jersey Transit is so underfunded that they've been transferring hundreds of millions of dollars of capital to operating for over a decade now. So when you add that up, New Jersey Transit has shifted anywhere from $7 to $10 billion that was meant to be invested in the system just to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And in SEPTA, you know, I mentioned to you before, I'm a St. Joe's graduate, and I love Philadelphia, but here's the problem. Other than 95, obviously, you know, the Schuylkill Expressway, 76, was built in between a river and a mountain.
Yes.
And so there's nowhere to expand
There's nowhere to go.
So if you were to eliminate SEPTA service, there is nowhere to put those cars. So you could shut a region down. I mean, it would be gridlock. So I'm glad to see that you're at the forefront of trying to address that.
Yeah, we're like I said, we're still in the midst of it right now, because this is a real life, like at the moment action.
It's happening now.
But some of our early maps of the volumes in transportation and related delays, you see these bright red bands. And so our job is to get that information out to elected officials, to employers, to anyone we can get that out to do what we can to help address the situation.
Well, it sounds like you're doing great work at the DVRPC, and
We're
we
trying.
appreciate all of it. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen. Ariella Maron of the DVRPC, thank you for joining us for this episode of TransAction TV.